On the west side of this basin, facing east, stood a magnificent palace of white marble, unlike any building I have ever seen in the outer world. Saint Germain had not said so, but I have always thought it was a precipitated substance. A large golden dome covered the central portion of the roof, and there were 4 smaller domes, one on each corner. When the morning sun flashed upon these domes, the whole scene became an indescribable blaze of glory, a daily, silent symbol and acknowledgement by nature of the great light and wisdom that poured out constantly upon the earth from this temple of beauty. We drove to the eastern entrance of this magnificent palace, and 2 youths in snow-white garments came out to greet us. They were the picture of perfect health, youth, and beauty. Their hair was especially attractive, one being a soft wavy brown, and the other a most wonderful gold. The latter welcomed us. "Beloved sister and brothers, you are expected and most welcome. Will you please follow me?" We entered and were greeted again by one of the ascended masters who is greatly beloved in the outer world, and who has worked ceaselessly for many centuries to bring enlightenment to the race of mankind. He has a very kindly face, a smile that would melt a heart of stone and makes one feel at once that he wields a power that solves all things. Other attendants came forward in graceful, rhythmic motion and led the way to our rooms. The interior design and furnishing of this palace were exquisitely beautiful. Since my first visit to that wonderful spot, it has been my duty as well as my pleasure to contact many important places throughout the world because of the work of the Great White Brotherhood with which I have been associated, but even the most elaborate have never approached the exquisite perfection of this white marble palace of the Ascended Masters. The whole interior of this wonderful building was made of an imperishable material, milk white in color, with here and there touches of a very delicate gold, violet, green, and an intense electric blue. This produced the most artistic effect imaginable. Everything remained immaculately clean because within and around the building all was so powerfully charged with electronic force and the vibratory rate was so high, the power of the light repelled everything imperfect, and kept all in a self-sustained state of beauty and perfection. "Dinner will be served in your rooms," explained the youth with the golden hair, "and you are requested to wear the silken robes and sandals that will be provided." When the dinner arrived, it consisted of several kinds of fresh fruit, among them berries served with a substance like whipped cream, similar to that which we have eaten at the Cave of Symbols, and a delicious drink of golden liquid a little less heavy than honey. As soon as we had finished our repast, we were summoned to the council chamber under the central dome. On entering, the great table in the middle of the room caught the eye at once because of its massive size. It was made entirely of jade, heavily veined in gold, exquisitely beautiful in even the smallest detail, and around it had been placed 60 chairs made of solid gold, and upholstered in a fabric of soft violet color that looked like silk velvet. We stood a moment admiring the beauty and perfection of it all, and as we looked around saw beloved Saint Germain. The entire council entered in little groups of 3 to 12. When all but one had arrived and taken their places around the table, our beloved master spoke. "Let us bow our heads in silent praise and gratitude to the mighty I Am Presence, which is lifting the hearts and illumining the minds of mankind." As we raised our heads, a most marvelous being stood in the place that had been left vacant at the head of the table. He was one of the great ascended masters to whom it is impossible to do full justice because the great majesty and authority to which he has attained surpass all human powers of description. His robes looked like a glittering mass of jewels, but as I became more accustomed to the brilliancy of his light, I saw that what looked like jewels at first were points of dazzling radiance emanating from his body and robes. The love he poured forth was so all-encompassing that it seemed to flood the universe, so far-reaching was its scope. "Beloved sisters and brothers of the Great White Brotherhood, I greet you," he said, giving the sign of the order that acknowledges only the omniscience of the mighty I Am Presence, the omnipresence of the undying flame of life, and the omnipotence of the shadowless light. "My brother from America, I bid you welcome. Please accept my love and gratitude for the service you have performed. I shall speak with you at length at the close of the meeting." This mighty brother of light proceeded to give definite instruction concerning the most important activities of the earth, principally the inner and outer changes that needed to be brought about for humanity's advancement. Many of the councils from all over the world were represented by those present. The chief of each council received orders direct from the presiding master and gave his directions to the ones under him. When the outline of their activities was finished, he asked each one to turn his chair about and face the west. In the atmosphere before us began to pass living pictures of the problems the Great White Brotherhood held under consideration, or were working on at the time. They showed the individual brothers who were concerned with them and would continue to work on special assignments, giving the principal details and means of solution. The work of protecting the young prince previously referred to, and the brothers who were concerned with it, was one of the many scenes that passed before our vision. The method for readjusting conditions pertaining to Arabia was also shown and excited my admiration greatly. When the greater problem of dealing with the sinister force which is trying to keep humanity from recognizing and manifesting the perfection and blessing of the mighty IAM presence was revealed, it was the most astonishing thing anyone can imagine. It really showed the unlimited force of the cosmic Christlight dealing with darkness, and no words can portray the majesty, power, and victory of the presence of the infinite IAM. At the present I may give no further details, but the glory and supremacy in action of the mighty presence of the infinite IAM transcends all imagination, just as light transcends darkness. The pictures came to an end, and the presiding master he of the dazzling radiance turned to the sister from France and myself. "Come, my beloved children," he said. We stepped forward, and he extended both hands, his left one to her, and his right to me. "My brother from America," he went on, "I bless you exceedingly. You have not yet realized the eternal perfection that is now yours in the outer activity. Our beloved sister is your twin ray. This is one of the greatest of God's mysteries and explains the mutual attraction between you since your first meeting in Paris. If the humanity of Earth could have the God understanding of this part of the divine plan, it would do more to purify the chaos of the outer world than any other thing we know. The time is nearing when the truth concerning the twin rays must be thoroughly understood and its mighty wisdom and power utilized. No individualization of God does creative work at cosmic levels in the fullness of the mighty IAM presence, until that one's twin ray has made the ascension. Earthly choice has nothing whatsoever to do with it. Each ray must, by conscious understanding and the use of the great command, purify, perfect and illumine all the human creation by which it has surrounded itself. It then becomes the ascended master who forever has conscious dominion over the earth and all that is therein. 129. When both rays have made the ascension, they are of the same state of purity, freedom and perfect dominion. The two are then able to work at cosmic levels. There, they can project great cosmic rays of love, light and wisdom. Focusing them with such power, they create and control cosmic activities and reveal the great glory of the mighty IAM presence. Our beloved sister has seen and known of this for some time, patiently awaiting this divine moment. After the raising of your body, your work together will be very transcendent. He raised his hands above us in blessing, and his voice, beautiful as a bell, with a tone of eternal authority uttered the supreme decree of love everlasting upon our Uman. By the command of the mighty IAM presence, I join these twin rays of the eternal flame of life in supreme love, light, and perfection. As the Master said these words, a dazzling shaft of light enveloped us, and in this, the mighty flame of our twin rays set its eternal seal upon our cosmic pathway of life. In that moment we were fully conscious of ourselves as only that magic presence of the IAM. This closed the council meeting, and in the hour that followed, we met the members of that retreat and received their congratulations. They assured us our unlimited cosmic service would now begin. The next day the Master who was our host explained some of their work and revealed the perfection that had been maintained there for centuries. In explaining the origin of their work, he said, "This Council of the Great White Brotherhood was created centuries ago by the Great Brothers of Light, that a powerful focus of their help and illumination to humanity might be brought about and perpetuated for a definite period of time. The wonderful semi-tropical climate you find here will last as long as we desire to retain this place as a retreat." That evening we were shown the perfected instrument for television in operation. I could not help remarking what glories and marvels humanity could and would experience, if it would only reach up consciously and sincerely to the inner light, and the individuals open their hearts and feelings to the mighty magic presence of the IAM. Early the following morning we returned to Bombay, whence we were to sail for Arabia. The trip to the coast was delightful, the atmosphere in the car always remaining cool and comfortable no matter how warm it became outside. I knew this was due entirely to the deep understanding of my beloved and my friend. We went back to Bombay by an entirely different route from the one by which we had come. The following morning we sailed on a small boat for Egypt, stopping at the port we wished to reach on the west coast of Arabia. When it reached the Red Sea, as we began to sail north on its placid waters, my friend suddenly became charged by the electronic force so powerfully that we all noticed it. For some reason, he said, I have contacted the period in which Moses led the children of Israel through this sea, for the living pictures are all appearing before me here in the etheric records. What a time of wonders that was in the midst of such a very great distress. Moses truly made a most wonderful contact with the ascended masters who were assisting and who wielded tremendous power through him to accomplish that undertaking. I see for the first time the great ascended master to whom Moses knowingly addressed his petition at that time for help. The majesty and power of that mighty being can scarcely be comprehended by the human mind, so marvelously does it transcend the ordinary experience of humanity. How little the modern world knows, realizes, or credits those marvels actually performed by such wonderful servants of God for the enlightenment and uplift of mankind. These stupendous so-called miracles are, after all, only the activity of Allah that humanity has not yet tried to study or understand. When one speaks in terms of universal truth, there is no such thing in infinite creation as a miracle, for what the world calls miracles are only the operation of divine law, which, because of its very nature of perfection, sets aside all humanly established laws of limitation. It is to bring the full understanding of the operation of divine law into the minds of the children of earth that the ascended masters have labored in the past and for which they still do labor unceasingly with the inhabitants of this planet. Today, all unknown to the outer world, there are still more wonderful things being done than in those days of long ago. So far as this vast, deeper knowledge and power are concerned, the majority of mankind are but babes. However, the hour is rapidly approaching when humanity must awaken to the all-encompassing inner presence of God acting through the individual. At last the boat stopped at our seaport on the coast of the province of Hejaz, a sort of peninsula jutting out into the northeast edge of the Red Sea. We landed at this quaint place and again were given the secret sign by a tall, slender Arab in spotless white garments who stood beside a large powerful auto, opening the door for us to enter. Without a word, we were driven away at unusual speed over a hard, sandy highway. There were lovely refreshments already provided within the car. Late in the afternoon we entered a small mountain village and drove up to a low, snow-white house. Our silent Arab guide opened the door and motioned us to enter. He knocked upon an inner door that was opened immediately by a white-haired elderly gentleman with brown skin and very kindly eyes. "Sister and brothers," was his greeting, "you are expected. Refresh yourselves, and food will be served as soon as you are ready. After nightfall a brother will call and take you to your destination. I trust the Brotherhood will not fail in their assistance to our country." I was about to speak when my beloved grasped my arm firmly. I understood her signal and kept silent. "The light of God never fails," my friend answered our host in a voice that made the very air tremble, so great was the power and truth with which his spoken word was charged, and so definitely did he utter that almighty decree. The effect was like magic. The old man fell on his knees and bowed his head to the ground before my friend. At 9 o'clock a handsome young man wearing the native white Arab dress over which was thrown a long indigo cloak, appeared at the door. "Friends of the West," he said. "Come, the way is open." We followed immediately without a word. We walked a short distance and found camels waiting. We mounted silently and set off at great speed toward a high mountain. Later I learned that these were the famous racing camels, and the one on which my beloved was mounted was Snow White. We sped along in silence for nearly 2 hours, and then came to a hut made of heavy stone and set close against the mountain. As we dismounted, a man appeared from out of the darkness to care for the camels. Our guide entered the hut and motioned us to follow. We reached the opposite side of the room and he raised his hands and placed them against the wall. They at once became a blazing light, so great was the power he directed. They were as dazzling as an electric light bulb, only much whiter. He pressed a certain section of the wall and it turned on a pivot, disclosing an opening into a tunnel of intense white light. We stepped into this, and the opening closed behind us. We followed him for several hundred feet and came to a metal door. Our guide placed his hand upon a certain symbol on it, and the door, weighing many tons, fully 8 inches thick, opened slowly, and we entered a long narrow room whose walls, ceiling, and floor were all made of untarnishable steel. In a few moments a door opened in one wall, where an instant before none could be seen, and a man entered, motioning us to follow him. With our guide still leading the way, we went some distance and at last came to another solid wall. It opened at our approach and admitted us into a marvelous chamber, fully 100 feet long and about 40 feet wide, furnished in a most extraordinary manner, but artistic, exquisite, and beautiful as a dream. In the center of the floor was a great circle enclosing a marvelous zodiac, and around this had been placed large soft cushions for 28 persons. Our guide stepped to a room at one side of the great chamber, asking us to follow. Within was a sparkling bath, beside which lay robes and sandals provided for our use. "When you are ready, send me your thought," said our guide, and left us. We finished our preparation and sent the mental message as requested, and immediately an attendant appeared with delicious refreshments. We finished our meal and then re-entered the great council hall, where 24 of the sisters and brothers had already assembled. Our guide presented us to the members, and all took their places around the circle. To my amazement I discovered that the Brotherhood who had acted as our guide was none other than the chief of the Council of Arabia, a great ascended master of whom I had heard many times. He arose, gave the invocation, and addressed the assembly. Because of unusual agitation, he explained, in the political circles of Arabia at the present moment, great secrecy has been imperative in bringing outside members into these councils. That is why there has been a constant watchfulness on our part while our visiting members have been en route. Matters of grave importance were presented for discussion, especially the one nearest to the hearts of these people. The chief directed their attention to my friend. "This brother," he said, "holds a solution to the problem concerning our beloved land of Arabia," and he asked him to present it. My friend outlined his plan briefly, and when he had finished, everyone in the room except our chief was surprised at its daring and ingenuity. The chief smiled reassuringly and continued. "The plan is feasible, remarkable as it is. It shall be carried out quickly and successfully. The entire Great White Brotherhood of the Earth will watch over the meeting that is about to take place, and you can rest assured, this plan will be set into operation at once. The sister and brothers who have come under special guard are to rest here tonight and tomorrow. On the third day I will go with them to the British consulate where our negotiations will take place." A wave of joy swept over the whole meeting as this outline of their work was finished. Other matters concerning their various activities were disposed of, and the meeting came to an end, the members disappearing one by one. The chief then arose and came to where we sat. 134, "Beloved sister and brothers," he said, "I did not reveal myself to you at first for reasons that you will soon learn. I welcome you with great joy to this retreat of the Great White Brotherhood. All is at your service. Brother from the west, retire to your quarters and sleep until you are called." I awakened 12 hours later at the signal, feeling like a new person, so charged was I with new life and light. "I think you will be interested in this retreat," our host said, "to learn something of its history and the part it plays as a center of power on this earth. It is one of the oldest foci of spiritual power on this planet. You have only seen a fragment of it so far. A year from now, a great council of the White Brotherhood is to be held here. At that time each member will be shown through this vast unknown citadel." He spent a long time showing us their tremendous accumulation of records which they have preserved for the enlightenment of humanity. It was truly a privilege to be shown these treasures hour after hour. "You will leave here at 2 o'clock, he explained. "Go now and put on your garments of the outer world, for by then it will be time to proceed to where the camels are waiting at our entrance." We obeyed, and when we returned, found the chief dressed in a beautiful blue flannel suit, wearing a long indigo cloak over it. Except for the marvelous texture of his skin and the brilliant, piercing, loving light in his eyes, one might easily have thought him to be a man who belonged to the outer world of business. "Why may I not look like yourselves?" he remarked, as he saw my thought. I am an individual like yourselves, only of greater experience and wisdom which I have applied longer. That is all. Wisdom is of no benefit to anyone unless it is used, and through that use, the individual manifests perfection, so he can live above every limitation. By this time we reached the gate where the camels were waiting. When all were mounted, we sped through the night with the wonderful white camel always leading the way. We made even greater speed than before because we arrived at the hut, the starting place of this particular part of our journey, at 3:30. The auto was waiting, and just as we entered, the driver said something to the master that I did not hear. "Have no fear," the chief replied, "we shall draw the cloak of invisibility about ourselves and the car, and pass them unnoticed. Let us proceed. Spies," he explained to us, "have been stationed along this road to seize the car and prevent anyone from discovering us afterwards. The right use of knowledge, which is true wisdom, always sets us free, as you will soon observe." It was not long until we approached the spot where the spies had been placed, and in an instant a dense white vapor arose all around us like a fog, enveloping the machine completely. A peculiar whirring like the sound of an airplane was heard overhead, and while the guards were looking up to find the source of it, we shot by silently like an arrow. It was a marvelous experience for me, because while we could see them through the cloak of invisibility from within, those on the outside could not and did not see us. "How is it," I asked, "that they did not seem to hear us?" "Sound," he explained, "does not penetrate the cloak of invisibility, otherwise it would be of no use to us. The tales of the Arabian Nights, my brother, are only too true, for when really understood, they are revelations of divine law instead of the silly, literal interpretation the outer world in its smug ignorance has chosen to place upon them. They are not folklore for children, but inner intimation of accomplishments that are perfectly possible when the student is sincere, worthy, and humble enough to be trusted with the power and truth they reveal. The great monster doubt and his nefarious associates, ignorance, pride, ridicule, skepticism, fear, and many other useless barnacles, have so fastened themselves upon the mentality and feeling of humanity, they have become like fungi hanging from a tree and rotting its trunk. If it were not for these vampires, mankind would see and know, within the very light which animates the physical body exists an intelligence and power that can and will carry out perfectly whatever the mind directs when harmony is maintained and all direction is constructive. Love, wisdom and power are the primal attributes which life uses to build a permanent creation, and when mankind ceases its self-created discord, all life around it and in nature will express permanent perfection. We drove along the seacoast on a splendid highway, and at last entered the city that was our destination. We registered at the best hotel, and early the next morning called at the British consulate. My friend said he had been sent as a representative of the Arabian government to present a certain solution for the impending crisis, which he trusted would satisfy all concerned, and prevent a very great injustice and indignity to Arabia. The British consul asked for his credentials, and instead of presenting them himself, the chief of the Arabian Council stepped forward and presented them in his stead. An appointment was made to meet with the British representatives at 11 o'clock, and we returned promptly at that hour. After the conference had progressed with its usual method of suavely yet persistently shelving everything which did not give them the best of the arrangement, my friend, at the opportune moment, arose and presented the proposal of the Arabian government. He was calm, masterful and kindly, yet everyone realized unmistakably that he was somehow in command of the situation, and all the dignity and power of the conference had centered itself around him. His opponents were not just altogether comfortable, he was too keen and honest for their usual method of diplomatic fencing, but somehow they could not present their ideas in a very favorable light in the face of his frank scrutiny and open kindness. They played for time by various kinds of strategy, when suddenly I was conscious of the entire conference being held within a great circle of blazing light so bright it seemed to me everyone must see it. Then I realized what a gigantic focus of power the Great White Brotherhood had directed into that room. Less than an hour later, my friend's solution was accepted, the documents drawn up and signed by both parties, and the meeting adjourned in peace and happiness. The news flashed quickly throughout Arabia, and there was great rejoicing. As we returned to the hotel, my beloved came forward to greet us. "Noble brother, I congratulate you," she said, "on your dignity and splendid accomplishment. The next day, the chief of the Council of Arabia bade my beloved and me goodbye, and we boarded the steamer returning to France. That evening we sailed on the Mediterranean under a full moon. To me it was the most peaceful night I ever experienced. We landed at Marseille, left immediately by train for Paris, and spent the night with the wonderful master who was the chief of the Council of the Great White Brotherhood in France. The following morning he drove with us to Cherbourg. Here we said goodbye to my beloved, whom I was not to see until years later. When we next met, it was never to part again. We boarded a liner for New York, and that voyage stands out as one of the most remarkable of my entire life, for my wonderful friend taught me the most marvelous use of the ancient wisdom. He instructed me, and the results I had from the use of the Great Command were simply amazing. We arrived in New York and hurried at once to Washington, where my friend presented the results of the Arabian matter to the president and his cabinet. The news had already preceded his arrival. That ended my first personal contact and observation of the stupendous and marvelous activity of the Great White Brotherhood. As Gaylord finished relating his experiences, we saw daylight just breaking on the eastern horizon. "Let us go to your drawing room," he said, referring to me, "for one of the ascended masters has much to do in the work we are to accomplish next. The lady and gentleman who are but pawns of the sinister force have in their possession certain documents and records which they have stolen. These papers contain information we need which they intend to use against innocent people for blackmail purposes. We must have that information in order to protect others whom they seek to injure and to bring into their clutches through the power of fear." We then returned to my compartment. I wondered what Mr. Gaylord intended to do next. We waited a few moments, and soon heard the man and woman go into the dining car. "Now watch carefully," said Gaylord, "and do not move or speak while I am operating." We sat down, and he focused his attention upon the door that led into their compartment. In a moment he directed a ray of electronic light upon it. He steadily increased the power, and we were enabled to look within the room. A traveling bag lay upon one of the seats. Gaylord held the force steadily until he saw what it contained. The expression on his face indicated he had found the information for which he was searching, and in an instant, he released the power and said, "In 3 days they will be ready for the proper authorities to welcome them to a long rest from any further activity of that kind. With those papers in their possession it makes their escape impossible. In this case, the newspapers will not be able to break through the wall of secrecy and invisibility of the ascended masters who control all human law by the one eternal law of divine justice." Saint Germain had indicated the hotel in Washington where we were to stay, and when we arrived, he welcomed us in person. His appearance was changed so that he did not attract undue attention. "My beloved brother," he said, as he went up to Gaylord, "I do sincerely congratulate you and give praise and thanks for your splendid success because you have broken the backbone of a very destructive activity, at least so far as that group is concerned." Turning to Rayburn and me, he greeted us in that loving, gracious manner that is such a distinguishing characteristic of all ascended masters, and particularly of beloved Saint Germain. "May I have the privilege of providing your breakfast?" he said. "I trust it will be quite satisfying and delicious. Will you come to my rooms?" After breakfast he suggested that we retire and get our much-needed rest, yet while in his marvelous presence we were never conscious of needing rest. The third day after our arrival, Rayburn, Gaylord, and I, accompanied by Saint Germain and certain members of the Secret Service, went to the rendezvous of an important group of those who were willing channels for the sinister force. There were present the 7 principal leaders in America. We reached the place and stood for a moment outside their rooms. We could hear an excited discussion going on in undertones as we approached the door. Suddenly it burst open and we walked in upon them, Saint Germain charging the atmosphere with an electric force that held them immovable. Their drawn guns dropped to the floor where they stood, and their arms hung motionless by their sides. Saint Germain raised his right hand, made the sign of cosmic protection and power, and in a voice that penetrated every atom, even of the building itself, uttered the eternal fiat of truth before which all destructive forces bow and are forever silenced. "Tell those who have been associated with you and all who come after you that, the light of God never fails." As his voice carried that decree into their consciousness, they turned ashen with fear from their own creation and their bodies shook like leaves in the wind. The members of the Secret Service stepped forward and took them into custody, where they shall remain until they serve the light.